Well, welcome to another Friday night. We're working our way through this series on prisons that come out of complex trauma. So the ways a child has to cope in order to survive, kept them safe as a child, but now in adult life, they're really making life not work for them. But yet when they go to stop those behaviors, they find that something keeps drawing them back to those behaviors. So they become like a prison to them. And today I want to look at the prison of power and control. And we're talking about somebody who has this high felt need to either be in a position of power where they're exercising power, or to always be in control of things. So there's really kind of two ways that this works itself out, and it's important to understand these. So the first would be, it's more focused on power over people, and the second one is more power over details and circumstances. So the one with power over people, it's the person who they just get this rush, almost like an addiction, when they feel people responding to them, where they're more powerful than people. People are doing what they want. People are obeying their commands. People are adoring them when they're conquering other people's circumstances. There's just a real rush in getting power. Another example of that would be a very pretty girl that just has learned that her beauty enables her to gain power over men. She can just wrap them around her finger and they'll do whatever they want for her. And there's a rush of power there. Now, it's important in understanding this one just to understand that we're not just talking about people who are in a position of power. This life trap can also be in a person who's not in a position of power but wants to be. And so there's a deep longing in them. Often they're not even aware of that deep longing, but there's a deep longing in them to be in a position where they feel powerful. Many of these people develop fantasies around being in power, fantasies of getting revenge and hurting those people that hurt them, of being in this position of power where they're adored, where they get what they want. So there's often a lot of fantasy connected with it. Some of these people, they've learned to play the long game. They learn that they're not able to be in a position of power now, but they're going to slowly work towards getting into a position of power, almost like a chess game. They're going to plan their moves very carefully so that they eventually end up in a position of power. What I think is important to understand with people with this longing for power is that fantasy part, that they have the belief that if they're in a position of power, then they're going to be successful, then people are going to respect them, then life's going to be good, then everything's going to work out well for them. So it's just almost this fantasy outcome that they have in their mind if they're in a position of power. For others, it's if they get in a position of power, and again, they might not even be aware of this, but they're finally going to get the validation from their parents that they never got as a child. Their parents are finally going to say, "We're proud of you. You've made something of your life. We now respect you." So there's a real drive to get validation that can be behind this. The second type of way this works out is that control over details, control over circumstances, almost to the point of being a control freak. This is often fueled by fear of getting hurt. So if I'm not in control of every detail, I'm going to get hurt, or I'm not going to get my needs met, or I'm going to fail, or I'm going to look bad. So fear is very much behind it. But with that fear is the balancing flip side of the coin, which is, I'm afraid because I can't trust people. I can't trust people to meet my needs. I can't trust people to be there for me, to protect me, to take care of me. So if their job's going to get done, if my needs are going to get met, I got to do it myself. Therefore, I have to be in control. Let me just read you a couple quotes as we kind of lay the foundation for this talk today. Erich Fromm said, "The lust for power is not rooted in strength, but in weakness. It is the expression of the inability of the individual self to stand alone and live. It is the desperate attempt to gain secondary strength where genuine strength is lacking. Somebody said this: being addicted to power and control is attempting to manage your outer world in order to soothe your inner world. So you don't know how to fix your inner world, but you think if you order your outer world, that'll fix your inner world. Those addicted to power and control need to control others, not because there are issues in the others, but because of something wounded deep inside of them. They will try to say that they do it because of the other person's behavior or attitude, but that's a lie. So they're trying to fix something deep inside of them, is the point. Dr. Gabor Mate said this in one of his lectures: I can tell you that coming from Canada, the same thing has happened over there, and many of my patients are actually First Nations Indian people, Native Indian people in Canada, and they are heavily addicted. They make up a small percentage of the population, but they make up a large percentage of the people in jail, the people who are addicted, the people who are mentally ill, the people who committed suicide. Why? Because their lands were taken away from them, and because they were killed and abused for generations and generations. But the question I ask is, if you can understand the suffering of these Native people and how that suffering makes them seek relief from pain in their addictions, what about the people who are perpetrating it? What are they addicted to? Well, they are addicted to power. They're addicted to wealth. They're addicted to acquisition. They want to make themselves bigger. So a real sense of insecurity and inferiority. And they needed power to feel okay in themselves, to make themselves bigger. And in order to get that power, they were quite willing to fight wars and to kill a lot of people just to maintain that power. Power, the addiction to power, is always about the emptiness that they try and fill from the outside. And Napoleon, even in exile on the island of St. Helena, after he lost his power, said, I love power. I love power. He couldn't think of himself without power. He had no sense of himself without being powerful externally. So let's go into our test. So answer 1 if it's completely untrue of you, 2 if it's mostly untrue of you, 3 if it's slightly more true than untrue, 4 if it's moderately true, 5 if it's mostly true, 6 if it describes you perfectly. And again, if you answer 5 or 6 to any question, then this is probably an issue for you. Question 1. At a subconscious level, I live with a deep feeling of impotence and powerlessness that I am always trying to compensate for. 2, I have a deep fear of failure. 3, I have a deep fear about losing control and having to trust others. 4, I dominate projects because I think that if you want it done right, you need to do it yourself. 5, I redo the work of others so it fits my way. 6, I take the lead or plain take over in meetings or conversations. 7, I'm not a good team player. 8, I get a rush out of having people carry out my wishes. 9, I struggle to let go or ruminate, obsess about the tiniest details. 10, I am highly organized and like systems. So the scoring, 10 to 19, probably doesn't apply to you. 20 to 29 might apply to you occasionally. 30 to 39, yeah, it could be an issue for you. 40 to 49, definitely an issue. 50 to 60, probably one of your core life traps. Now, before we go into origins, I need to just talk about different ways that we gain control. So an obvious one is intimidation and fear. So this is the person that is just angry, ruthless. They bulldoze their way into situations. They scare people into submission. But then, secondly, there's seduction. They charm their way. So they make a good impression. They're charismatic. They're sexy. They promise people what they want. They appear committed to others. They sell their body. They sell themselves. They use sex any way to seduce you to submit to them. Thirdly is manipulation. Other ways of getting you to submit to them. So they gain leverage over you somehow through guilt, through bringing in other people, through creating a crisis, for getting you to feel sorry for them, for using information against you. All different types of ways of manipulating. Some, they seek power through becoming an expert in a field. So they're smarter than everybody in this area. That gives them a sense of power. Others, they use just fastidious attention to detail in two ways. They look after every detail in situations to make sure everything is the way they want it, but they pay careful attention to others. They pick up the details of what they like, don't like, their strengths, their weaknesses. They remember information, all the details, so that they can use it against them, gain leverage, know how to play them. So they are just detail focused. So where does this longing for power and control come from? Let's look at the complex trauma part, because that's where I think mainly it comes from. So first of all, the bottom line is the child felt helpless throughout their childhood. They lived with this helpless feeling that they couldn't resolve the problems of their life. They tried, but nobody was helping them. Nobody was giving them tools. And so they couldn't resolve feelings of being in danger all the time. They couldn't resolve getting their needs met. They couldn't resolve the negative, painful emotions they were feeling. So they had all of these areas they couldn't resolve. They tried everything, and they just felt increasingly helpless because nobody was there to care for them or help them. Often what happens with that is this child is spending so much time trying to figure out how to resolve the problems of their life that they begin to escape into a fantasy world where they're a superhero that wears a cape, that can resolve everything, that has ultimate power, that can take revenge on all the people that are hurting them, that can fix all the problems. So they have these fantasies of revenge, ruler themes, as becomes part of their life. And that gives them hope. And then as they get older, they develop the belief that if they just could have lots of power and be in total control, that would solve everything. Then their needs would be met. Then they would stay safe. Then they could fix every problem. And so they began to have this deeper and deeper longing for power and to be in control. But it was all driven by a deep sense of helplessness. So that can come out of childhoods where a child was given no choices. They weren't allowed any autonomy. They just had to do it, whatever their parents wanted. So they didn't have any power. They had zero. Or a child whose parents wanted to connect with them and say, oh, I want to do this with you. But every time they connected with their parent, what they realized is their parent only wanted to connect with them to use them, to manipulate them, to soften them up so they would do what the parent wanted. And so what they began to realize is that connection leads to being manipulated. And don't connect, because then people are going to control you. People are going to use that connection as a way to gain power over you. Or they had just a very controlling parent who had this life trap. So they grew up with constantly being controlled by this parent. They hated it. They rebelled against it. But now something in them is repeating it. They're becoming the parent that they hated, because that's what they think is going to solve all their problems. Or they grew up in a family where the family was always about one-upmanship. They had to be a little bit better than everybody all the time. They had to have a little more power than everybody in order to feel good about themselves. Or this is a child who was regularly abused or bullied at school or by a sibling, but nobody stopped it. And they couldn't stop it themselves. They were too little. They were powerless to stop the abuse and the bullying, or they were sexually abused and they couldn't do anything to stop it. They were threatened to never tell what happened. And so again, that deep sense of powerlessness sinks into that child and they hate it. They just long to be in a position where one day they have power. So as they get older, what begins to develop in their thinking is that power and control will solve all of their underlying issues. So what has happened as they've been neglected, abused, manipulated, and they felt powerless, is shame has developed. They felt it's their fault. They felt they're not good enough. They're too weak. And so their brain goes, if I just get power and control, that will solve my shame. Now, again, this is working at a subconscious level, but it is working in their brain. So if I'm in power and control, then people will respect me. People won't see my weakness, my shame. People will do what I want. I will be better than. I will be good enough. Power and control will solve my shame. Then, if I'm in total control of everything, then I can do everything perfectly. And if I do everything perfectly, then people will surely say I'm good enough and respect me. So just a little sidebar here is that when you look at a narcissist, that's what they're doing. Power and control is actually their drive, but it's hiding their shame. They don't want people to see any weakness, any flaw in them. That's their deep fear. The second thing that happens in this child is if I'm in power and I have total control, then all my needs will get met. Then I don't need to trust anybody else. I'll just be self-sufficient and can take care of everything. Then I'll never get hurt again if I'm in total control and have total power. And then I can be in control of the details of circumstances, so I don't have to live very long in times of change or living in the unknown, because living in the unknown and all of that, I feel out of control. That's a very scary thing. I feel helpless. It triggers all kinds of things. But if I'm in control, I can get rid of unknowns by orchestrating everything the way I want it. And that will fix my anxiety. So I won't have to deal with anxiety anymore. And then nobody will abandon me. If I'm in control of everything and I control people, they're not going to abandon me. So that'll fix my abandonment issues. So what you can see is that this helpless child who hates being helpless, who's lived with the terror of being helpless, has got it in their mind, a belief now that power and control will fix all their problems. It'll make all the things that have hurt them go away. All of their fears disappear. All of their 12 needs will now be met. So they have developed a belief system that is actually a lie. It's not complete. But in their mind, to a child, it looks like it's complete. And the way then to handle all of the internal pain and turbulence is to create external security, to be in control of the external world and the people of that world. They don't know how to fix the internal world by going into that internal world. They are seeking to fix the internal world by controlling and having power in the external world. But it makes sense to a child that that is the solution. So let me go into the characteristics. And I want to just really go general, underlying, and then some very day-by-day type of characteristics. So at a subconscious level, they live with a deep feeling of impotence, powerlessness, And so there's something deep inside that's always trying to compensate for that sense of powerlessness or helplessness. Deep sense of failure, fear of failure, a deep fear of losing control, having to trust others. They hate feelings of vulnerability, hate feelings of weakness or needing others. And so as a result of those deep fears, and what I want you to see is that it comes out of a helplessness that creates deep fears in many areas of life, that's what all of this is trying to compensate for. And so now they like to dominate. They can be very competitive. And then to gain power and control, they can use intimidation, sometimes even violence, or they gain respect through impressing others, through creating fear in others. And so they become very occupied with external image, possessions, position. All of that is about gaining a feeling of power and respect. They use manipulation, guilt, shame, anger, gifts, flattery, giving you the cold shoulder, distorted logic in how they argue with you. All of that manipulation tools. Some become what we call fear mongers. They present worst case scenarios in order to create fear in others, and then they come along as a savior, and that makes them have power over people. Many put their focus on gaining dirt on everybody so that now they can leverage people, blackmail people. They keep score. So everything you say, every time you hurt them, they file it away. And one day they're going to use it against you or as a way to manipulate you. Many will do whatever it takes to either gain control or maintain control. They will lie, they will betray you, they will hurt you, because power is more important than people. People are just pawns to be used to gain and maintain power. Many use sexuality as a way to gain power. Most of the people with this, they pride themselves, they spin it, so they say, oh, I'm just self-sufficient. I've learned all of this stuff, so I just don't need to be so dependent on others like others are, as if that's a weakness. Most try to convince themselves that they're the winners. They're the ones that are the accomplishers in life, that work hard, and that's how they spin it in their mind. But in practical things, everything has to be done according to their plan and on their schedule. They don't like to delegate. They would rather do everything themselves than delegate, because then you'd have to trust people. They micromanage others and make them fit their expectations, which are often unrealistic. They dominate projects because they think if you're going to do something right, well, you're going to have to do it yourself. And so they want to be in total control of projects. They take the lead and often just take over projects. They often redo the works of others. So other people work for them, but then they just redo it so it suits them, which makes them not a very good team player, because it's got to be their way or the highway. They got to win all arguments, have the last word in every argument or discussion, and then they don't allow themselves to get emotionally close to anyone unless it's a game. They want to use you now, so they act really close to you just so they can manipulate you. But they don't really allow themselves to connect to people. They often are offering unsolicited advice to others. And in their minds, they're just trying to help them improve their life. They feel kind of their obligation to give some helpful advice to these people that desperately need it. And so they often frame it as they're offering constructive criticism. But really, that's a veiled attempt to say, I'm trying to push through my agenda. I'm trying to get everything my way. Those that get close to them often feel pressure from them, that they're always trying to change them, always trying to get them to be what they want them to be. Now they'll frame it again and say they just want the best for you. They just want you to be happier. And so they're just trying to help you become a better person. But really, they're trying to control you. They want total power over you. When they're with somebody else and get closer to them and somebody does something a bit different than them, instead of saying, oh, that's just different, but that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. No, they go, that's wrong. Unless you're doing it the way I'm doing it, it's not different, it's wrong. And now they find a way to judge you, a way to make that a moral thing, that you're not doing it right. And so they get stuck in this all or nothing thinking. And basically that unless you do it my way, it's wrong. There's no other way of looking at it. My way's the only way. Often they struggle they just obsess about details. They're constantly going hamster cage in their brain where they're just going over everything to look for every little detail to make sure they've thought it through, they've got it perfect. That's part of it. They can be very moody especially when they don't feel in control. Then they can get really dysregulated and really grumpy. Many, they're highly organized and they like lots of systems, lots of routines. They can be very rigid and almost anal in how organized and obsessive they are about details. Many of these people project their internal turbulence onto you. So if they're feeling lots of fear, they say you've got fear issues. If they got lots of anger, instead of owning it, they say you got anger issues. So they're always projecting their unwanted emotions onto everybody else. In times of major crisis, they like to play the hero. They like crises because they can swoop in and then that gives them power right from the beginning because they're in the superior position helping people. Many of these people in their internal world often have a strong inner critic. They're berating themselves all the time if things aren't done perfectly, if they missed a little detail, that's going on in their brain. They have a lot of trouble respecting people's boundaries. They don't like to take no for an answer because they want to be in control. They often have a hard time with ambiguity. They need to know all the details of every situation. They don't like to hear, well, let's just play it by ear and see what happens and just flow with it. No, they don't like that. They need to know all the details. And so if you're in a conversation with them, they have a hard time not knowing something. And so if they think you know it and you haven't clued them into it, then they're going to hound you until you tell them because they don't want to be in a position where they don't know something. These people tend to have a lot of denial about their own internal world, their own behaviors, their own emotions. Often when they meet people, their first response, if they don't use intimidation, their first response is to groom people, to be sweet, to be very kind, to be very social. They're just very polished, and that's a way to gain power initially over people by being such a nice guy. They can be extremely demanding and critical if you don't meet their demands. And so what you can see is that they struggle to maintain relationships with co-workers, with partners, even with friends, because everybody gets tired of them wanting to control them and everything about what happens. And so there's more and more conflict that begins to happen. But what happens in that conflict is they often twist it to try to make it everybody else's fault. They have a hard time owning their own mistakes. And then we talked about they work hard to manage this image of positions and power, of being this superior person. They have a hard time relaxing. Often there's just a drivenness that they got to stay on top of everything all the time, so they can't relax. Often they have very little empathy for people who make mistakes. So if somebody makes mistakes, they immediately judge them. They consider them to be stupid or lazy or lacking self-discipline, just not a lot of empathy. They may devote a lot of energy to a very structured, organized personal environment. So everything in their office and their home has to be spotless, nothing out of place. That's part that can happen for some. They can be extremely angry, irritable, lots of anxiety when somebody makes them late, when things don't start on time, things don't go according to plan. That just causes them to really get dysregulated. They have lots of personal rules, rituals, routines in their life. They often overplan very simple activities. They often are backseat drivers. They got to tell people when to turn, when to start. They're just constantly, they can't not give advice. They even have trouble with the TV remote. They need to control the TV remote. And if somebody else has the remote, they get a lot of panic over that. They're a smother mother, a helicopter parent that just wants to make sure their kids never have anything bad happen to them. They control everything. Now, there are some more severe ways that this can work itself out, extreme control power issues. And so this is the person who they get into an intimate relationship, and more they try to control every aspect of their partner's life. Who they see, their friends, how much they see their family. They try to cut out other people in their life. They control activities so that they're the only person who is influence in their partner's life. That often leads to abuse. That often leads to gaslighting, where they make the other person begin to question and second guess their own thinking, everybody else in their life, so that it ends up that they only trust their thinking. And so with that, there's a deep, unreasonable jealousy that's just there all the time, that if they talk to anybody else, that they get super jealous, and then they have to control. So that, as I said, often leads to abuse, and it's the extreme way that this works itself out in intimate relationships. Now, what's interesting is people with this power control, they don't see it as a negative initially. They always put a positive spin on it. They justify that it's a good thing. So they will say something like, oh, I just like seeing things done right. That's why I'm the way I am, as if that makes everything good. Or I'm just very responsible. Or somebody has to take charge, so I just take charge. Or I'm a type A personality, that's just the way I am. So they have all of these justifications so that in their mind they can go for years thinking that they are a very virtuous, wonderful, this is a very good thing. They don't see the damage that it's causing. They don't see the internal world that they're trying to compensate for. That doesn't come out till later. So here are the consequences that start to come out. They begin to realize that they can't control everything. They can't be God, let's say. There's just some things they can't control. And so the more they try, the more frustrated they get, the more angry they get. And so what begins to happen is it creates the opposite of what they want. So people, their children especially, begin to rebel against their total control. And so they're losing their children. It's causing extra stress and anxiety in their life, this need to have this power and be in control. It actually feeds shame because they can't have total control. Everything doesn't go the way they want. And then their relationships just start to get more and more stress, more and more conflict. It breaks down, but it doesn't satisfy. They gain this power. They gain this control. It feels good. It gives them a rush, but it leaves them empty. And so then they need to chase the next power to feed the monster. And it gives a little bit of satisfaction, but then it leaves them empty. And it becomes an addiction where they need more and more, but they become full of a deeper and deeper emptiness and dissatisfaction. Now, before I go into healing, I want to talk about how do we respond if we have somebody in our life who has this life trap. So they're all about power and control, and they're trying to exercise it over us. So it could be parents, could be a partner, could be a boss, could be a friend. What do we do with people who have this life trap and they're not prepared to deal with it? Well, bottom line is you got to set boundaries with these people. And that might mean you just have to pull away from them, don't spend much time with them, because they're constantly trying to manipulate you, gain power over you. The relationship is never going to be healthy. It's never going to be equal. And so you just back away from that relationship and set boundaries. Or you just set very clear boundaries where you're not going to allow them to treat you with respect, to manipulate you. You call them on their stuff. But realize that when you're with people like that, especially if you've got some of this helplessness, stuff from your own complex trauma, being with people like that will trigger you. And when they try to manipulate you and gain control over you, it's going to cause you to become dysregulated. You're going to fear conflict with them. You're going to go into oppositional defiance with them and just rebel and get angry and lash out. Or you're going to go into people pleasing and just give in and do whatever they want. So be just very aware that you're going to get triggered by these people, and be aware of your triggers. And then use curiosity. Begin to identify, okay, what is this person doing? What's the tactic that they're using to try to control me? Oh, yeah, they're using guilt. They're using anger. Okay, what is that triggering in me? Be mindful of that. Learn from that, because that is going to help you learn how to respond. Now, usually with people like this, if they try to gain power over you through intimidation, through anger, it's not usually wise to fight fire with fire, to respond with anger. That's usually going to backfire for you. You need to find other responses. And so some of those responses you need to think through. These are going to be new tools about how to respond. So you might need to just walk away from the relationship. And no, if you're going to be that way, we're not going to have a relationship. And the choice is yours, but I'm not going to be part of this. Or if they're trying to kind of take control of you, sometimes you can just distract, change the subject, get them off to something else. And that kind of gets you through that situation without it creating a major conflict. Because this isn't the hill you want to die on, is basically it. So let's just change the subject. Or you can just, if they get into this control freak type of situation, you can just ask a question and go, well, but what about if we did it this way? Just to try and get them to maybe be open to other ways of looking at something. So spend time just learning how to respond to some of these people when they're trying to exercise power and control. That might enable you to work effectively with them, or that might require you just to walk away from the relationship. Sometimes when you're with power and control people and they're your boss, they give you instructions. The instructions are good and wise, but it triggers your oppositional defiance. It triggers your limbic brain, and something in you just wants to rebel. Stop yourself and go, whoa, let's not just rebel against them because they're in power mode. They're my boss. I need to consider whether their instructions are wise or not. And if they aren't wise, if they're asking you to do something that goes against your values, your beliefs, then you have to make a decision where you go, okay, I can submit to a power-hungry boss, a control freak boss, as long as it doesn't go against my values and beliefs. But here's where I draw the line. And if the boss asks me to do something that goes against my values and beliefs, then I either have to confront the boss, set a boundary with the boss, and if I get fired, I get fired. But I can't just keep giving in because they're my boss. That will slowly destroy me. So let's go to healing. What do we need to do to heal from this life trap if we have discovered, wow, I didn't see how much I hunger for this control, this power, the needs that I'm trying to compensate for? So let's begin by understanding the childhood powerlessness. Go back in your mind to those times as a child when you felt so helpless, when you didn't have any control, when you weren't able to resolve the problems of your life and nobody was helping you. Go back and feel what that child felt. That's often just a very helpful way to get even more insight into this whole topic for you. Then develop mindfulness today. Catch yourself when you're sliding into pursuing this power, control, need for it, the rush, needing to control all the details, and stop yourself and say, what's going on here? What's behind this right now? Is there a fear? Is there a belief that it's going to make everything work for me and get all my needs met? What do I think will be the positive consequences of gaining this power and control? So become more and more self-aware of what's going on. But once you begin to realize that often you're operating off of fantasies or lies, that if I am in power and I have control, then it's going to fix all my problems, I'll never get hurt, blah, 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 then start to challenge those lies. Start to challenge the fears and the thinking behind those lies. So some of the things you can go is, if you have this belief that if I'm not in total control, something bad's going to happen to me or something bad's going to happen to my child, that's why I got to be a smother mother, then go, how likely is that to happen? What evidence do I have to support this? Is it even helpful to think this way? Am I focusing on the negatives and only in discounting all the positive pieces to this? So begin to develop ways to challenge the lies. And like I say in almost every talk, you got to heal the shame. You got to heal that internal world, the shame, the fears, that feeling of that I'm weak. Because if you don't, then you're going to continue to need to go to this external power fix in your life as the solution. So get to the real issue and begin to heal that and work on those fears. But that means you're working with the underlying fears, but then there's still going to be daily anxieties that you have to learn to manage. You have to learn to sit in. It's okay when I'm not in control. Nothing bad's going to happen. I can sit in this discomfort, and you learn to tolerate it. Then you're going to have to begin working on your trust issues. Learning to trust safe, reliable people gradually is important. Then you're going to learn that in situations you can't control, you can't change, you just let it go. You go, okay, I can't control this. I'm not going to obsess about it. I'm not going to try to gain control. I just have to let it go. And then learn to listen to what people think and say. Learn to get input from others. That's part of building trust. That's part of learning. I'm not the only one who can do it right. Others are smarter than me. Others have advice to offer that I'm going to benefit from. That is so important. And then if you sense there's an impulse in you to start manipulating others, stop and ask why. What's going on? But then don't give in to it. Because if you give into it, you're feeding that impulse, and it's going to be even harder to quit the next time around. So start to catch your manipulation tendencies and when you get the impulse to manipulate. Bottom line is begin to order your inner world. So somebody has said, like we said at the beginning, being a control freak is attempting to manage your outer world to soothe your inner world. That's called primary control. Then they go on to say this. Secondary control is more focused on managing your internal response to your outer world. So basically managing your own thoughts and feelings about the uncertainty around you. So every time your internal world is dysregulated, instead of focusing on fixing your external world as if that's a solution, you stop and go, no, I got to learn to figure out what's going on in my thoughts, my emotions, and learn to manage that and heal that. So it's learning to control your internal control freak, somebody has said. Then it's learning what's my part and what's their part as I'm going about relationships. So I can't control them. I can't do their job for them. I have to let them have autonomy. I have to let them make decisions. I have to make sure they do their part and I do my part. So I need clear boundaries where I end and where they begin, what my part is, what their part is. That is so important. Be open to new ways of looking at things. Learning other perspectives is such an important part in this. Now, very practically, take practical steps to actually delegate stuff to others. And then don't run around and check up on the person constantly. Trust that they're going to do it. That's going to be important, but difficult. Make a decision to completely give up control in one area of your life to somebody else. That could start with the remote control. That could start with not backseat driving. But it's just give up control in one area. Start there, and you're probably going to find this is going to be super difficult, but it's going to lead to a whole bunch of growth. So take small steps is what I'm saying. You don't change this overnight. You got to be really patient with yourself. So start with very small steps, and then gradually you're going to see more and more change happen and growth happen. As I look at our world today, I just see the damage that this life trap of power control does. Many of these people are justifying that they're doing good stuff, they're wonderful people, but they're leaving in their wake a trail of damage. If you see that in yourself, I hope this begins to help you change and grow and become a person who can learn to deal with your own fears, your own fantasy false beliefs, trust others, get guidance from others, work with others, have intimacy with others. That's where true joy and happiness comes from. Well, that's another